Greetings, bots and fembots. Welcome to Renegade Phoenix Media, and I'm your host here with another toy review. This time we're going to be taking a look at a pair of Springers. That's not Springs, but as in the Autobot Springer, best known for his appearance in the original Transformers the movie. Unfortunately, I don't have the original Springer, as in the actual 80s toy, but I do have what's essentially the only two other real Springers ever made. Interestingly enough, despite the popularity and a fan favorite status of this character, and that he is in fact quite well known thanks to his prominence in the movie, for whatever reason, Hasbro never really made any other Springers. Occasionally there have been like tributes or homages to the character, but they're usually in the form of another Transformer that perhaps somewhat resembled Springer and was then later repainted to look like him, perhaps even renamed. But one of the things that Springer is best known for is being the first Autobot Triple Changer. Now for toy reviews, I don't think we've really had a chance to discuss Triple Changers that much, especially into what exactly a Triple Changer is. And a Triple Changer, simply put, is a Transformer, whether an Autobot or a Decepticon or any other faction for that matter, that has two distinct alt modes. That's the simple explanation. It is a slightly more involved than that. Some people will accept that simply as it has two alt modes, it's a Triple Changer. However, classically, the original Triple Changers went a little bit beyond just simply having a secondary alt mode. The concept of the Triple Changer is that both modes are an actual thing, if you will, such as turning in, from a robot into a train engine or a space shuttle. These are two actual real-life vehicles that are distinct from each other and recognizable. Not all Transformers with a third mode or a tertiary form necessarily turn into something for that third mode. Sometimes that third mode is an attack mode, or assault mode, or transportation mode, or something of the like, where they don't actually turn into anything. They just simply reconfigure into something else. A good example of this would be the Transmetals from Beast Wars. Maximals and Predacons in that series, their alt modes weren't vehicles, but were animals. The Transmetal was a variant technology, essentially, in which a Maximal or Predacon who had undergone the transmetalization process gained a tertiary form, a vehicle mode, if you will. However, these vehicle modes weren't cars or trucks or airplanes. They were the Beast mode with some vehicle components on them, like having jet engines attached to the waist, or VTOL engines to the hips and rollerblades on the feet, that sort of thing. Optimus Primal most famously for being simply in gorilla mode and essentially riding a hoverboard or a floating surfboard. It's a third mode, but he hasn't actually turned into anything, right? He's still a gorilla, he just now is on a hoverboard. So they're not considered to be Triple Changers because of this. Although, like I said, there are those who simply consider any Transformer who technically has third modes to be a Triple Changer, but classically Transmetals are not considered to be this. In the case of Springer, however, he is a true Triple Changer, and the first Autobot to be given that designation. Now, I don't have the original Springer. Like I said, I do have these two other Springers. Both these toys were made to be Springer. And so we'll take a look and compare them in both of their, both would be normally what I would say, but in all three of their various modes. This here is Springer's armored car form. Now, Springer, when this movie had come out, was supposed to be set in the future. It's not the future anymore, of course, but back in the 80s, it was still the future. So he's supposed to be a futuristic style Earth car. Some people mistake him, along with others like RC or Blur, as being Cybertronian vehicles, forgetting that Transformers the movie takes place in the future and starts off on Earth, of course, since yes, Springer is one of the Earth Autobots. So this is actually an Earth mode, but from the future. And one can see with this one, it's a very Mad Max style armored vehicle. Looks like, except perhaps with the color scheme, I don't know how bright green or radioactive green perhaps fits, but it looks like he could be from an apocalyptic future. You'll notice I quite love how just heavily armored this vehicle looks. From the armor panels along the side to covering over the front wheel here, the thick gray armor looks on the back, and even the sort of bulletproof looking windshield. This guy looks like it, despite being technically not a military vehicle, like he could take some firepower though. He can take some punishment and keep on coming. Even these wheels have a sort of almost off-road look to them, as if he could take, almost any type of terrain. And there does appear to be, if you can make it out, guns mounted on either side. A bit rare, of course, for an Autobot civilian-type vehicle. Now, this version of Springer is from the Thrilling 30s line, which is part of the Transformers Generation line, an earlier mode that predates the Combiner Wars and the like, and was celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Transformers. So it's perhaps quite fitting that they finally released an actual Springer. I actually said before, quite like this vehicle. Probably one of my favorite vehicles for any Autobot. The only mildly thing is the thin type spoiler tails back here. They're basically helicopter bits that didn't really have anywhere to go. They do look slightly out of place on a vehicle, car like this, but not enough to like ruin the effect or anything. In fact, this was a bit of a theme of the new car-type Autobots introduced back in the Transformers the movie. Most of them have some type of spoiler or tail fin. Blur has it, RC has it, Hot Rod has it, and Springer has it. Although, in his case, it's more of an after effect of his alternate mode. His alternate vehicle mode, that is. Now, you can have the model just like this, but as you might have noticed earlier, Springer does indeed come with a weapon. A sort of a double-barrel missile launcher here in depth charge style, and you can place it on top of the vehicle like so to give it a armored look. This, of course, further or a more weaponized look. This, of course, furthers the Mad Max type looking. It's not like you've armed a military-grade weapon on this vehicle. And, of course, the reason it has that hole there at all is because that's actually where the propeller will go in his alternate vehicle mode. You've actually got even a choice. You could mount it closer to the front, where it looks like it's going directly through the cockpit. I don't particularly care for it up there. It looks out of place, but you could mount it there if you wanted to. Now, here is the, as of this video, newest rendition of Springer, which is the Transformers Generation War for Cybertron Siege Springer. That's not a mouthful or anything. And again, they're technically both part of the Generations line, so this is sort of I have to say the upgraded version, alternate version. This one is designed to be more reminiscent of the original toy, at least in its appearance. With, for at least the vehicle mode, the car mode that is, some debatable results. I actually do quite like the original aesthetic of the 80s Transformers series, and I actually do quite appreciate it when Hasbro sticks to as close as possible. That said, that doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement, and my one gripe with this is that it doesn't really look like a car all that much. Even in the movie, he looks more like a... This seems to be more based off the original toy, even more so than his appearance in the movie, which I would have preferred, if you're going to pick a G1 aesthetic, go with the show aesthetic over the toy aesthetic. Although, people who own the original toy might disagree, and feel more nostalgic, of course, to the toy, so as in all things, it's going to be an opinion. As for myself, this loses something in translation. This cockpit here, or the pilot seat, driver's seat, doesn't really look like something on a car, even if we grant it's from the future, and this is actually supposed to be because the Siege line is the pre-Earth form. So this is, in fact, the Cybertronian version of Springer, unlike of what appeared in the Transformers the movie. But, like I said, it's alright. I don't hate it. But it doesn't quite pull off the car look for me anyway. Again, you got the tail fins in the back, left over from his helicopter mode again. The front of the vehicle is a little bit more like the show or the movie than the Thrilling 30 Springer was, with the large panels here coming down the front, and the nose cone here of the vehicle being set back and being yellow as well. And of course, a very large, prominent Autobot symbol there. if you are considering getting the Springer, do be aware that it's actually getting him into his car mode is the most difficult of all. Not that he's a super complicated transformer or anything, nothing like the Autobot brothers from Robots in Disguise, for example. But this panel here, clicking onto the gray here, it's actually his feet. It never really wants to go in, is the problem, and will usually stick and just be kind of flapping loose. I happened to transform it into vehicle mode, and it just, for the first time since I've actually gotten this and transformed it, clicked in. This is maybe the third or fourth time I put him into car mode, and this has never actually securely clicked in like it is right now until this time. And I don't even know how or why I got it that way. I just transformed it as normal, and it just went right in for whatever reason. Which is probably why I've not transformed him again. Although for this review, I will have to. But just be aware that it's a bit tricky, and even several times I finangled it and tried to, gently force it in, and just would not cooperate. And now I wasn't even trying or aware of it, just clicked right in. I have no idea why. Again, as with the previous Springer, you can use the various weapons and helicopter leftover bits. It is slightly parts forming, admittedly, but weapons are removable anyway from a transformer, so as long as it's a weapon, I don't mind if it's slightly parts forming. It's when it's not a weapon or any type of equipment that I mind when it's parts forming. And so you can set up a turret just like before. It's quite loose because, again, this is actually where the helicopter goes. He's actually got multiple holes over him, as these siege types do, for the combat system. So you can technically place it elsewhere if you like. I don't necessarily know why you'd want to place this elsewhere, but you can. There's even actually holes here on the side if you'd like to use that instead. But obviously it's meant to go here, where it would seem if you were going to mount a weapon, you can. Now, an interesting bit to note, I don't know if anyone else who's done a Springer review, as I haven't actually watched any, but there's actually two different weapon configurations shown here. And of course, the whole point of Siege is to be able to configure your own weapon systems anyway. But the instructions show to put the gun like this. However, the back of the box, as you can see here, I'll give you a close-up for the car mode, actually shows it in a slightly different configuration. And to get that, it's actually quite simple. Remove these sword blades, or helicopter blades, depending on your interpretation. They serve both roles. And place them on the sides of what will be the helicopter propeller base. For this configuration, more widespread. It's up to you which one you prefer. As I said, the instructions that come with it show it attached to the sides of the long-barreled rifle here. The box shows it attached to here. I mean, either way works. I don't know if any one is really better than the other. So here's both Springers side by side again, judging solely based off the car mode, the sort of armored futuristic car form here. I say I do prefer the thrilling 30 Springer over the Siege Springer. Again, not that the Siege Springer is bad. Too many people tend to look at black and white. You must either hate or like something. There's middle ground. You can like both things, but prefer one over the other. I do not hate Siege Springer. I do think he looks good for a sort of alien futuristic vehicle. My preference is definitely for the armored Mad Max apocalyptic car, though. Alright, with that done, let's get him into his secondary vehicle mode, the helicopter mode. For those curious, this is what the Siege Springer will look like in his copter mode as displayed on the box. I don't have the box for the thrilling 30 Springer anymore, unfortunately, but here's a quick look for those who were curious.
We now return to the Transformers.
Alright, so this is what separates the Triple Changers from the tertiary modes. As you can see, these are the Springers in their helicopter modes. They are not a car with a helicopter propeller blade sticking out of the top for them. They are, in fact, supposedly at least, helicopters. Interestingly enough, this is Springer's preferred form in the TV series, and the one he uses most in the movie. Preferred alternate mode, that is, of course. I mean, his robot mode is the most preferred mode of all. And interestingly enough, on the Springers, it seems to be the weaker of the three. I'd say their armor cars are usually a little bit more convincing of vehicles than the helicopter modes tend to be. I'm not 100% sure why that is. It takes a lot of engineering to get a distinctive, recognizable third mode built into a Transformer toy that already has the complicated process of becoming one vehicle mode into a robot and having action figure levels of articulation. Something usually has to give. In Springer's case, tends to be, for whatever reason, his helicopter mode. Maybe it's, the people who create this, designers, are more experienced with vehicle modes, since that's what most Autobots turn into, so they're more experienced with Autobots, automobiles. Maybe it's just to keep him more in line with the other Autobots. If you have them all in their car mode, presumably you'll display Springer in his car mode as well. I don't know. But I never find Springer's helicopter modes necessarily the most convincing. But let's take a look at them individually and see what we have. So here is the Thrilling 30 Springer in his helicopter mode. You can see the propeller is attached now. It is technically a little bit of parts forming to get it on. But as I said before, the propeller is actually a weapon for both Springers, because that's how it was for the original Springer. So since it's technically a sword, I don't really mind that it's technically parts forming to take it on and off. It would be nicer if, once in vehicle mode, if he was transforming from one vehicle mode to the other, the propeller blade was actually stayed part of the vehicle. But, I mean, it's doable. You gotta give some allowances, and storing a propeller blade somewhere is very difficult. I forgot to mention it, but the keen-eyed in the audience may have perhaps observed that it was actually slung underneath the car. The blade part actually slid through here, although these pieces were up here at the time. And the hilt, because it's stored in the sword mode, actually stores in between the landing gear, with these folding around it to keep it in place. It's not really that securely clicked in, but actually holds in its position very well, and there's not really any danger of it dropping out. As helicopters go, it's not the most convincing. It does have us against somewhat armored, mechanized, militarized type, while still somewhat being civilian. It does look to me a little bit more military, but that may just be due to the heavily armored nature of it. Despite that this type of helicopter, since it's like an Osprey or something, have propellers in the rear, you can't really see anything that looks like a propeller, just this large, round, sort of armored area that perhaps a propeller could be inside. But of course, it's actually just the rear wheels. The front wheels are stored in here. And if you look from the front, it's a slightly car look to it, perhaps, but it's not overwhelming. And actually on the side, you can get a little bit of the tires, but it's actually mostly concealed. You even have these sort of look like the dark green here as weapons. If you're curious where the black guns in the car mode went, they actually are behind here like thrusters. But these panels here were also in the car mode, but there were door panels and pointing in the opposite direction. I do like the bit of mech detailing that comes out here and is revealed on the side. You really only get to see this in helicopter mode, which is cool that they actually etched that into the mold. It's painted, of course, but it's still cool that it's there. There is landing gear stored inside the nose cone to match the rear wheels, allowing you to land the helicopter. It's got some fins on the side. As I said, it's not the most convincing of helicopter modes, but usually, if you get any more complicated than two modes with the Transformer, never mind a combiner or something, usually something has to give, and it's often going to be one of the extra modes, whatever they perceive as extra. In Springer's case, maybe because Autobots are cars, it usually is this helicopter mode that suffers. Maybe they assume if you're going to display all your Autobots in car mode, then Springer's going to be in car mode with them. Or perhaps they're just more familiar with designing car robots than they are with helicopter robots. I don't know, but just seems to be the fate of the Springers. His cars tend to get more love and attention than his helicopter modes do. But that said, I don't at all dislike this helicopter mode. It's certainly, again, that kind of post-apocalyptic Mad Max. It actually looks fairly armored and dangerous without necessarily looking military. As before, you can mount a weapon on it, and in the case of this Springer, the guns actually are mounted underneath the cockpit in helicopter mode rather than above, as it was in car mode, which is a nice switch and change it up a little bit. It technically replaces the landing gear because you can't bring it out now. So if you want to land the vehicle, it still can land, but you have the weapon out instead of the wheels. But that pretty much wraps it up for this version of Springer. So let's bring out Changer Springer. Yeah, this doesn't look like a helicopter. To be honest, this looks like a giant pizza cutter. Not really my favorite helicopter mode, I have to admit. Part of its dorkiness is actually a little bit charming to me, so I can't honestly say that I despise it, but I do have to say if I was to pick helicopter mode Transformers, Springer would make it to the bottom of the list. The front here is just too wide and round entirely in the wrong way, and the back is just way too thin, especially compared to the large front part. Also, unlike with the Thrilling 30 Springer, there is no attempt to make this look like a rear propeller blade. This is just straight up his wheels, his rear wheels placed back to back here. I will admit the top part does fit a helicopter motif a little bit better, as these look more like, type of engine or exhaust manifolds, so that does work. The propeller blade is fine, and obviously spins quite well. It's got a tail fins back here that kind of ironically look like they're mounted on backwards. Feels like it should be the other way. He does have weapons mounted here to either side. This is the rifle that was on top, split in half and placed on either side. You can swap it. Interestingly enough, as you may be able to make out, there are grooves here on the wings, for lack of a better term, on both sides. Interestingly enough, and they're made for the slots that the blades could attach to, depending on which rifle configuration you had for the car mode. These grooves are meant to go into those slots. This side works perfect. Interestingly, this side, it doesn't really want to go in. Could be a defect on my model, could be common. I have no idea. It's the only one that I have after all. But if you own a Springer and want to try, for sure, feel free to leave a comment below and tell me if the weapons work just fine. I'm sure you could force them to go in. But this is just, when I plugged it in, plugged it up, went right in. The other one did not. Another thing I don't particularly like about this version of Springer is there's no actual chains to the cockpit. Now they did change the sides here. These, as you remember, were in front of the middle nose cone. They are now slotted behind. Again, this is similar to the original Springer toy, and it is at least a difference, and I do appreciate it. Other than that, these wing panels have come out, and that's really it. There isn't anything different about this cockpit. It's the exact same piloting era, which of course makes it look like it's the car form with a propeller blade sticking out of the top. It's really not that radically different. Now, back then when the original toys made in the 80s, it was probably as much as they were willing to handle. It was probably as much as they were able to handle, or at least more importantly, as much as they were willing to handle and spend the money on. But I have to say, for something that came out now in 2019, although it was probably designed in 2018, but released in 2019, not really that impressed. Again, it's got a kind of dorky charm to it, so I can't say that I hate it. And if you do like a kind of clunky, retro sci-fi look, this may actually appeal to you, and I could understand that. Like I said, it's not in me to actually despise this, but I am going to have to say it's my least favorite helicopter mode. So while neither Springer's helicopter mode is perfect, I do have to again give it to the Thrilling 30 Springer. It is, from the two we have to work with, the superior helicopter. So let's take a look at the Springers in their robot mode.
The Transformers will return after these messages.
Now at this time I would like to ask if you enjoyed the review and would be interested in seeing more reviews in the future. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I've already made actually reviews of numerous Transformers, both from the Siege toy line and from earlier toy lines. So please show your support. If you would like to support financially, I do have a subscribe star you can donate to. The link should be below. I don't currently have a Patreon account due to some shenanigans involving Patreon and MasterCard. I'm reluctant to trust them, as they've proven to be untrustworthy several times over the past couple of years recently, and that I know of have never made any apology or attempt to make things right. So for now, I'm hesitant to actually utilize their services, as they aren't particularly creator friendly or reliable. If that changes in the future, though, I may open an account there. But regardless, here are the two Springers in their robot modes. I do really wish I had the third Springer for a triple changer review here, but we'll have to make do with these two. Now a quick note, as I should have mentioned earlier with the Thrilling 30 Springer, if you notice that my color may be different to possibly a Springer that you own or Springers you're more familiar with. This is in fact the Takara color scheme, which is a lot nicer than the Hasbro version. I don't know why it is that Takara and Hasbro started coloring their toys different. They didn't really used to do that back in the early days of Transformers, but at some point they did start coloring the Transformers different. I'm most aware of it happening during the Generations toy line. Maybe it predates that, but I kind of originally tuned out of Transformers when Armada came on, because that was even worse than Robots in Disguise. I didn't really get back into Transformers till actually Titans Return, when I saw all the original aesthetic movie characters on the shelves and thought, oh, I have to get these. I actually only recently acquired even the Thrilling 30 Springer. I kept waiting and waiting for a good deal since he had come and gone before I was aware of him, and I could only find the Hasbro color version. For some reason, during this period, and all the way up really to Titans Return, ironically, ending at Powers of the Prime, Takara tended to paint theirs to be show accurate, while Hasbro painted their toys to be the toy accurate, as in the color scheme the original toy had, which didn't always match the original show appearance. And for whatever reason, Hasbro went with the toy version, Takara with the show version, and in the case of Springer, the show version is much, much nicer of a color scheme than the toy. So I actually held out for 2 or 3 years, just keeping an eye on eBay, the secondary market, for a local Springer to be sold. And I was fortunate enough that actually relatively late last year, probably about this time, maybe slightly earlier, late summer. I don't think it was quite fall yet. I found this Springer for a reasonable price, again considering the scarcity and difficulty in often acquiring older Japanese models. Only, of course, for then a couple weeks later for them to start advertising that they're going to have a Siege Springer the following year. So let's take a closer look at these two guys. This is the Thrilling 30 Springer. He's not so much the movie or show accurate, or inspired even, so much as he's based off an appearance in IDW comics. You can definitely see the resemblance, the inspiration from the original, but he's not actually designed to look like the original Robot Mode, so much as he's designed to review the art style that was done in that comic book series at the time. I don't know what year it was. I believe it's IDW. Needless to say, I quite like this interpretation of Springer, regardless of it not necessarily being the 80s aesthetic. He definitely has a strong action hero type appearance. Which is how he went on to be characterized in the comic books. Some people described him as having sort of a Indiana Jones-like personality, although of course he wasn't an archaeologist. Now I didn't really bother to go over articulation for the two alt modes, because like I said, if they're not beast Transformers, they don't tend to really have much in the way of articulation in their vehicle modes, unfortunately. In car mode, all 4 wheels spin, and his gun turret will rotate. That's about what you get. In helicopter mode, his propeller will spin, and that's about all you're going to get. However, in robot mode, since the 90s, since Beast Wars gave them action figure articulation, he's got quite a bit here. So let's see. Obviously, first is the head, which is on a ball joint, allowing him to look up a little bit, down, quite a bit actually, surprisingly, and of course side to side. As you see, he is quite tall. That probably befits a helicopter transformer with the long tails they tend to have, which gives him some impressive height. He is in fact a Mega Class Transformer, so he's larger than Dulax, but not quite as big as the Ultras, the big boys. But nevertheless, thanks to his length, he's rather tall and lanky, not actually unlike myself when I was a teenager. For shoulder articulation, the joint is attached up here, which some people may not quite like, as it doesn't perhaps looks like it should be more come from here, perhaps. Powers of the Prime, Rodimus Prime had some similar complaints. Doesn't really bother me all that much. There is a slot here that works like a peg, which you can use to keep that slotted in for a more solid look, although of course it keeps the shoulder locked in place if you choose to do that. He does have a bicep rotation and a joint here on a ratchet, which is quite nice and solid for his arm. And I do appreciate it being a ratchet because it means this arm holds up nicely and can hold poses as well as equipment. The hand does have a wrist rotation, which is also very nice. He unfortunately doesn't have much in the way. He technically has a waist rotation, as you could see. The problem is this large back panel, which doesn't really get out of the way very well. You can attempt to put it like this, I guess, and rotate it if you absolutely do need his waist to swivel for some pose. But as you can see, it does kind of destroy his back a bit to do that. So I like that he has the waist rotation, but unfortunately, there's not much he can do with it due just to his transformation. But I do appreciate that it's there. That is a sign of quality craftsmanship. And I do have to say, this Springer has an excellent reputation as being one of the best Transformer toys that was ever made, actually. I mean, regardless of it, the best Springer toy. It's just a very good, very solid, very well-made Transformer toy. If you're looking for a quality model, this definitely qualifies. Now, for the legs, he does indeed have the... he has a pelvis joint here that's double hinged, allowing him to do a complete split. And then a thigh rotation as well. He can move his leg all the way up. And again, technically he can go all the way back. But again, you have the back panel issue that gets in the way. You can try to finagle it a little bit. But it's, yeah, like there's just not much you can do about that. Sometimes the bits of the alt mode, the vehicle modes will get in the way. For knee, again on ratchets, as you may be able to hear from the sharp clicking sound, which again means he can hold a variety of poses. Interesting, they can also help aid him in poses, is the knee guard, if you like. This blade-looking thing is actually the helicopter landing gear, and it rotates fully out. And you can use that to help actually anchor him if you want to try to, pose him and kneeing, getting on one knee, for example. This, I don't think, is an intended feature, but it actually works quite well, and I've gotten him into a variety of poses, like I said. So it's something that, like I said, I don't think was intended, but actually works quite well. He does have a toe bend, more as a result of his transformation than actually a feature. There is no ankle tilt, but at this period in Transformer design, again, part of the Generations line, but pre-Combiner Wars, they actually started designing the feet to actually automatically work at a tilt, allowing him a more heroic, open type stand. As you see, he's so tall, he is actually difficulty fitting inside the camera frame. But overall, I quite like this version of Springer, and I really cannot highly recommend it enough based off the figure himself. Now let's move on to his accessories. Thrilling 30 Springer comes with 2 accessories. Here is the helicopter blade. And to get it into sword mode is actually quite simple. You simply move the green part down, and as you can maybe set up, there are a bunch of notches. And basically, this part of the hilt will simply click into one of those notches. There's no specific notch. It'll go into any of them. The propeller blades then fold up here together, and will click to make a complete sword. Very futuristic mech-looking sword. I quite like the transformation conversion there. Quite clever. The sword is perhaps slightly unbalanced in that this green is only thing here is only on one side and not the other, but I mean it's not like I said something that's going to ruin it. And Springer looks quite good actually holding it. It's very easy to get this guy into a lot of dynamic poses without even really trying. Really, one complaint I would have, as you may have already figured it out, is that he does unfortunately suffer from the light piping syndrome, which means if you do not have a bright light source behind him at all times, he will have the sort of dead-eye look, as if he's offline. It's unfortunate, but it's a common, unfortunately, Transformer, hesitate to say feature, but design choice that unfortunately is all too common. It doesn't ruin the guy. Certainly if you do have a light source behind him, it makes him look like his optics are online, and it is a cool effect when that works. It's unfortunate that it rarely is the case. What is nice, though, about this Springer, if you view him from behind, notice he actually technically has 3, though one of them is hidden here, holes here that the peg on the green here can actually slot into, allowing him to store his sword behind him. even at a tilt like that, which again works for some dynamic poses. Now, aside from the light piping, here is the one other area that certainly is less than perfect. Like I said, not enough to ruin the figure or anything like that, but they did cheap out on his weapon, unfortunately. As far as the looks go, it looks fine. Looks kind of cool, mech-looking, futuristic, double-barreled shotgun missile launcher blaster thingy. No idea what you would call this, but unfortunately it's not spring-loaded. This is actually more friction-based, which results also in these missiles being very, very loose feeling, although they don't actually fall out or anything, but they, bang around, tilt around, it's distracting, and doesn't look as nice. Would have been nice if they had actually gone for a spring-loaded clicks into place. That would definitely have been much preferred. But, I mean, this is alright. It's not bad, it's just slightly cheap feeling. But I suppose we can let them off the hook. Maybe they spent all the R&D budget on the robot mode and had to cut corners somewhere. It's fired by pressing this gray part forward. And actually, only one will fire at a time. I do like that. Given what this is, that is actually a little bit of quality put into there, so that you can choose to fire only one missile at a time, or press it far enough rapidly and fire both. You may have also noticed that there is actually a hole on both ends of top and bottom of the weapon, I should say. You can indeed feature the sword onto here if you want to go with a more bayonet look. I'm not sure why you'd really want to do that, considering just how big this bayonet is, and that's not how bayonets work. But if you would like to have the weapon that way, Springer most certainly can still hold it like this, and if you have a combined, more powerful weapon or whatever nonsense. Personally, I prefer to keep them separate. But as I said, it's very easy to get some dynamic poses without even trying with this Springer, and I really can't recommend him highly enough, despite the few very minor nitpicking flaws about him. If you have not gotten this model, I do recommend that you go out and get it if you have any interest in a Springer at all, even if it's in the Hasbro color scheme. There are actually, I believe, 2 variants of the Hasbro color scheme. The original one, and then a Heroes of Cybertron, I think it was called, which was a larger collector series. Probably really expensive, but features a more metallic color scheme to Springer. Personally, though, if you can find it at a good price, which for me is under $100 for a Mega Class Transformer, most certainly, I would recommend most of all the Takara color scheme on this guy. If you're all concerned about there being color variants, since Powers of the Prime, which was the line before Siege, Hasbro and Takara no longer have variant colors for their same Transformer models and characters. Again, there are still repaints like the Seekers, the Starscream, Skywarp, and Thundercracker are, identical save for color, but they're different characters. Takara Springer and Hasbro Springer are both Springer. But since since Powers of the Prime and now Siege, they don't recolor them. They are functionally identical in color. Although I am told Takara sometimes uses a glossier paint. Although if that's still true, I don't know. Was true during the Beast War days. May be true now, may not be. They're not significantly different. But for the thrilling 30s, if you can find it at an inexpensive, reasonable rate, I highly recommend this version of Springer. This is what Springer looks like in the box art. You can see him in robot mode and a kind of a closer-up version with his own weapon and one of the battle masters, or more appropriately, a target master. Some people have theorized the name change is because some of the target masters are now handheld melee weapons rather than guns. But again, a hammer still could technically be targeting. You obviously want to hit him with one of the appropriate ends of the hammer, and not the flat, for example. And a target master could certainly still angle the warhead to hit the correct area at the correct angle, and that would still be aiming or targeting. I think probably more likely it's simply a trademark issue. So regardless of why, they are officially referred to now as Battle Masters, but most Transformer fans and collectors are going to call them Target Masters anyway, because that's what they are. Here's the rather cool box art version of him. I am glad to see this come back, actually. Transformers had stopped doing box art for a lot of their Transformers. Instead, they would just show you a picture, like on the back of the box. This is definitely reminiscent of the Beast Wars types, and definitely a time when Transformers was in its prime for a while. So it's nice to see this box art style return. I definitely wanted to go ahead and point it out real quickly. You can see a couple of Autobots back here. That's Jazz. I'm not quite sure who that is. You'll see it says Voyager class, and for some reason a couple different languages. I guess that means they can be more lazy with who they ship this out to. But of course, Voyager class, I mean, Voyager just means to be, going on a voyage somewhere. It doesn't really mean anything. And when it comes to a size class, it's, for some reason, what Generation refers to as the Mega class. They call the Voyager class. Again, not something Transformer collectors are really going to refer to this size category for. After all, we know it's really a Mega class. Now, despite the fact that both Springers are the same class size, this Springer is actually quite a little bit shorter. Not to say that he is short, but he is a little bit shorter compared to the other Springer. I mean, not really by much, but he is a little bit shorter and a little bit stouter looking. Now, if you are a fan of the original 80s aesthetic, this Springer's robot mode is a winner. I definitely cannot help but look at him and think Transformers the movie. He is not based off of the comic book version of Springer, and I'm pleased to say his color scheme is largely based off of the movie as well, with some allowances, of course, for the vehicle modes. But the original Springer's entire chest plate was yellow. The toy, that is, not the show. Torso, of course, was green. So here you do have a little yellow here in the stomach area, the belt and such, but that's passable. Does not bother me in the slightest. His chest is largely green, given the Autobot logo and, of course, the battle scarring that that Siege has. As previously with the Thrilling 30 Springer, I didn't go over the articulation of the two alt modes because Vehicle Transformer, they don't really have any. Rest assured, though, that all four wheels do roll in car mode, and the turret does turn or rotate. And in helicopter mode, the blade spins freely, and he doesn't really come with a landing gear, despite his mega class size. But let's get on to, of course, the robot mode, which is where all the articulation takes place. The head is on a ball joint, although it almost might as well be a swivel. He can look up a little bit, he can look down a little bit. It's not really significant, though. But again, it does what head really needs to do for the most part. He does have the shoulder rotation and a secondary joint to bend it out. Interesting enough, it's essentially the same hinge type as the Thrilling 30 Springer, albeit a little less obvious. But if you don't particularly like the way that connects, then, well, neither Springer is going to be for you. He does have the bicep rotation, but the wheel does get in the way a little bit. Be aware of that. The elbow does bend. Now, this large shoulder plate, this large pauldron is basically permanently attached. You can get a little swing back if you like, but that's all you're going to get. He does also come with wrist rotation. So really, his articulation is about the same as his earlier counterpart, although I'm sure far superior to the original 80s version. He does have the waist rotation, and despite the fact of him not having a large backpack like the Thrilling 30s, he still manages to have something get in the way of his waist. So you can only turn it so far. However, I mean, realistically, that's about as far as it would turn on a person anyway. So I don't think it's really a big problem, but if you're trying a more extreme pose, it could possibly get in the way. He does have the hip, I called it pelvis before, but the hip rotation there, and he can do a split if you like. You can actually, due to his helicopter transformation, this actually does fold down. If you wanted some extra height for some reason or a more extreme pose, personally, I would not do that, but your toy, your choice. He does have the thigh rotation here. He also has a knee joint that does work. There you go. That is for the transformation. But again, if you're a more extreme pose, you might be able to get something out of that. Now here we get to the feet, and this has some collectors complaining. There is some truth to what they say. I do find it's a little bit exaggerated, but not baseless. The legs here, they do have an ankle rotation, and it is true that the legs don't necessarily have anything that they click into, and therefore it is possible for them to collapse a little bit. However, it's not actually that likely to happen, I've discovered. He's perhaps slightly less stable than the average Transformer, but really, I've been able to pose him in robot mode really just fine. He's almost never fallen down, and again, with any Transformer, they all fall down at some point. Even just having him sitting on a table and walking by doesn't cause him to collapse. Even fidgeting around with him, he's fine. I mean, obviously, you pick up and shake him. You have a bit more problematic, and pieces will start popping off. Or popping out of place, I should say. He's actually, I have not had anything pop off him. But so, if you're thinking of not getting him because you heard that he can't stand up or can't stand up well, rest assured he actually can stand up just fine. It is, like I said, slightly more tricky, but not significantly so. Not really noticeably so. As I said, I've not really had any significant issue with his ability to stand. For accessories, you do have this rifle here. This is how it appears in the instructions for car mode. And you also have this doohickey. Unfortunately, I don't really know a purpose for this. I'd simply leave it attached to his back, and he can mount his weapons as storage if you would like to do it that way. It's unfortunate that they didn't really come up with a better, more elegant solution. Unlike with the previous Springer, this was incorporated. Thrilling 30 Springer had it incorporated as part of his sword, but this Springer just has it as a loose, pointless joint. Now the gun is, of course, made of modular components in the combat style. There are two sword blades that are, as far as I can tell, identical. Nice close-up look at it. It's got some techno bits on the bottom for some reason, or top if you like, depending how you put it. Both swords have it because they're both identical. As for the rifle, it actually splits into two different guns. Kind of Power of the Prime's, the Ultra Evolution figure style. And both guns are not identical. They are, in fact, quite different. Now, Springer here can either dual-wield swords, which I don't think the original toy had. I don't own it, so I'm not positive. In the movie, he's only ever shown to have one sword. Maybe the toy had two. Maybe he had two in the series at some point. I'm not sure. Perhaps he had it in a comic book, based off his original appearance, presumably. Nonetheless, I quite like the, dual-wielding sword style, especially with him being green and the single blade-like look, very reminiscent of Leonardo from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, actually. My favorite turtle, incidentally. Alternatively, he can dual-wield pistols as well, if you prefer that. Or, of course, he can have one of each. Now, what I do appreciate with this Springer, similar to the Thrilling 30 Springer, is the weapon storage. This is something that traditionally Hasbro and Takara tended to overlook in robot mode. Of course, the original Transformers tended to have no weapon storage whatsoever. If they weren't in robot mode, there'd be a pile of accessories to one side. Then when Kenner took over for making the models during the Beast Wars, they started storing the weapons and equipment in their alt modes, as they should have all along. But only sometimes could they store the weapon in robot mode. And it's always nice when a Transformer can, essentially holster his weapon and doesn't have to lug it around in his hand the whole time or leave it lying somewhere. With the Generations line, they're actually pretty good at doing that 98% of the time. The swords can store to either side of these slots, as you can see, and there are holes on the side, and you can simply store them right here on either side very neatly. And they look like they could be in a place where he could actually reach up and grab them. I quite like that. Although actually rotating the shoulder causes the backpack to become loose. Alternatively, you could also store them on the helicopter here. Again, this was how the box art shows the swords being stored in the vehicle mode for the gun turret. And they can also serve to store the weapons in robot mode if you like. They are loose, of course, so I don't prefer them, but you may. That's fine. Now, as for the guns, the easiest way to store them is to simply combine them together and attach them to the middle and then slot them into the back of the backpack. But it's not the only way to store them. You can simply remove the helicopter joint or base there blade and store them individually onto the backpack and those extra holes we mentioned earlier when he was still in car mode, allowing for slightly better weapon storage. Now, I don't particularly like leaving loose pieces of the transformer lying loose, so you can still plug that into the middle if you like, just to keep everything together. And there you go, very nicely stored, allowing him to be in robot mode and carry his weapons with him. And that really concludes my Springer comparison. If you want to know which robot mode I prefer, that is a tricky one. Definitely if you are looking for the original aesthetic. The Siege Springer's robot mode really hits it nail on the head. Probably for an official toy, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the best that we ever get, or at least for the next 30 years. 30 plus years, I should say. Overall, for an action figure level of articulation and just a cool dynamic robot mode, Thrilling 30 Springer really can't be beat in that regard. I really can't recommend this guy highly enough. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you would like to see more like this, feel free to leave a comment below and tell me so. Otherwise, until next time, thanks for watching.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shore of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate. All those moments we lost in time, like tears in rain.
I got better things to do tonight than die.